We begin this news hour with the war in Ukraine. Russia's lower chamber of parliament, the State Duma, has ratified agreements to absorb 4 regions of Ukraine into Russian territory. All votes were unanimously in support of the move, with no deputies abstaining or casting dissenting votes. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military appears to be making significant progress regaining territory seized by the Russian forces, including the Kherson region. Arise News' chief correspondent John Cookson has the story.
In the ebb and flow of this grinding war, the Ukrainians are claiming significant gains. In a blow to the Kremlin, the army has pushed Russian troops out of Liman, a city which was being used as a transport and logistics hub by Putin's forces. Ukraine's President Zelensky triumphantly told his people, "Liman is fully cleared. I thank our military, our warriors. Glory to Ukraine," he said. Taking Liman has paved the way for Ukrainian troops to push further into Russian-occupied Donetsk, Luhansk and further west in Kherson, although a Russian-installed official has played down claims of major Ukrainian gains in Kherson. Kirill Stremosov said, "Everything is surprisingly under control here. The enemy have broken a little deeper, but our defense system is working. No matter what anyone says, we're not panicking in Kherson." Meanwhile, in Moscow, the lower house of the Russian parliament has unanimously voted to approve the annexation of the Ukrainian provinces of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson into the Russian Federation. This follows President Putin's declaration last Friday. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said, "I'm sure their adoption will serve the benefit of the entire multinational people of our country, and the 4 regions will rightfully become part of the Russian Federation." In cities and towns liberated from Russian control, this is Izium, families are struggling to rebuild their lives. The city was occupied for 6 months and is still without electricity, water and gas. Food and humanitarian aid will help, but some of the mental scars will take a long time to heal. John Cookson, Arise News.
And our chief correspondent, John Cookson, joins me now. Good to see you, John. Let's start with the situation in Ukraine's Kherson region. It's been described as tense after Ukrainian forces made advances there and reclaimed control, we're told, of 2 villages. How important is this latest advance?
Hey, Charles, good to see you. Kherson was always expected that, in fact, the Ukrainians would make some inroads there. It's very difficult fighting territory, both to fight and to defend in the Russians' case. I was down in that region close by in March for Arise News, and it's although it's a fairly flat land, it's very watery, and the ground really can give away very, very easily. Not great for tanks and heavy military equipment. So the Ukrainians have an advantage here in trying to seize back some of the territory seized in Kherson. They will, however, come to a river ahead of the Kherson city itself, where the Russians are very deeply entrenched there. But, you know, their tails are up, Charles. They feel that they've made progress taking village by village. And it's the same story elsewhere in Donetsk and also further north as the Ukrainians really get their counteroffensive underway. The EU announcing tonight that it's going to train 15,000 Ukrainian troops to put into the fight back. It's important the Ukrainians get as much land back as they can, because winter is not very far away now. Only a month or so when the Ukrainian winter is really going to set in, and the Russians know all about that, given their history of defending their own country, how in fact, the winter can favour one side or the other. So interesting developments tonight. But before we get too excited about Ukrainian gains, tonight, Charles, the Russians still control, if you include Crimea, 100,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory tonight. And that's the size of Hungary or Portugal.
Well, that's a very, very important point to make, John. And also, as you said, I mean, the Russians have gained their land bridge to Crimea. I mean, how significant is that, and how hard will it be for the Ukrainians to take that land bridge back?
Very hard indeed, especially as the Russians are now getting into the theatre of war. Their equivalent of these HIMARS rockets, which the Ukrainians have used to such effect, they will start to be becoming available to the Russians. And look, make no mistake, we're entering possibly a very dangerous phase of this conflict, because if the Russians lose too much territory, then Putin will very likely be tempted to use tactical nuclear weapons in this conflict, and the ramifications of that are absolutely massive, and how the West will react and how NATO will react to that is still open for debate. So we are getting into a dangerous territory militarily here, because the harder the Russians get pushed, the more temptation there will be for Putin to use a weapon of mass destruction. Interestingly, Charles, over the weekend, General Petraeus, former four-star general in the US military, suggested that, in fact, if the Russians did use a nuclear rocket with a nuclear warhead, then the Americans would support the taking out of the whole of the Black Sea Fleet in revenge. So it's not just a one-way street. Although this horrific weapon could be used, the ramifications for Russia are still profound.
And John, you talked about the danger of the situation now. You also, talked about the fact that Kyiv appears to have the momentum, but we're hearing a lot of hawkish comments around on both sides, but also growing questions, as you mentioned, about how things proceed from here. I mean, you know this place very well. How do you think things are likely to proceed from here?
I mentioned the winter before, and it is really important for the Ukrainians to gain as much territory as they can before the snow comes, and some of this land will be impossible to fight on, and conditions will become absolutely terrible. The threat, I think, is how much territory is Putin, the great enigma here in all of this. How much territory is he prepared to lose before he unleashes one of these terrible weapons? I mean, that's what we're looking at tonight. And I have a contact close to the regime in Kiev who told me on the weekend that the Zelensky administration fully expects Russia to follow through. The possibility of a nuclear attack is very strong. Now that raises the question: where would the Russians fire this terrible weapon? Because of course the radiation will drift away from the scene. The general wind flow in that area is west to east, so one thinks that if Putin was going to use one of these weapons, he wouldn't use it in the four regions seized by Russia, but to the west of there, maybe in the Odessa area, Mykolaiv. It's really a terrifying scenario. So here we are, I think, on the brink of a new phase. The Russians getting better equipped with their HIMARS rockets and being pressed hugely by this Ukrainian counteroffensive.
John, thanks ever so much, and I do apologize if I made you repeat yourself there, but we needed to get a bit deeper into that dangerous phase that you were talking about. John Cookson is Arise chief correspondent.